Welcome back to Before You Build. I'm Brandon Holland, Senior Sales Manager with ARIID Build Remodel.
And I'm Ariana Anderson, CEO and a head designer. And in today's episode, we are going to talk about designers and contractors and what happens when the two don't really communicate.
Yeah, because most disasters don't start with bad construction or bad design. They start when you have two individuals that have a different vision for how to complete the same plan. So
yeah,
let's get to the bottom of it.
Let's get on it. So we have some cool questions that we want to ask. Where do you see that the most common things happen with a breakdown between a designer and a contractor, Brandon?
Yeah, I think it all starts with communication. It's very important that you communicate very early on between one another. The contractor and designer need to be on the same page from the get-go. And, one of the biggest issues I see with contractors who aren't working with the designer directly is they don't really have access to the design information until the construction documents are done. They're ready to start building. And so you don't really have a long runway. It's really just quick start and you're just thrown into the fire. And, there's a lot of breakdown in the very beginning I've seen. And so like with a design build firm where everything is in-house, we get to be part of that process with the design team early on. I mean, even before we're ready for construction. And so there's a huge advantage to that on the communication side.
Yeah, communication is super, super important.
Yeah. All right. So when we walk into a project where design and construction haven't been communicating, what's the first thing that you notice on the site?
Yeah, that's a great question. It would be decisions that are being made without actually checking in with the design team. What happens is on site, sometimes you can have gaps in the cabinets that were not supposed to be there because it was really never checked. And decisions are starting to be made on a job site without bringing in a designer. And for some reason, a lot of contractors are afraid of going and asking a designer of like, how do you want this to be done? So you'll see them throughout little things. Some of them are big and sometimes they're in finishes and other details that just will reduce the quality of the construction or of the finished project.
Yeah, sometimes I think it's as simple as, when you're looking at a set of plans, if it's calling out a 24-inch door or if the cabinet spacing for an appliance is a certain dimension, sometimes I've seen contractors just build to that dimension and, a lot of time and trouble would be saved if they literally just asked the question of the designer.
Yeah. And Brandon, how often does a homeowner actually know that this is happening?
Yeah, so here's the thing. A lot of times they don't know right up front, and they should. You should be communicating with the homeowner just as much as you are communicating with the other teams. But with us, we try to include the homeowner in these decisions when they affect the final outcome of the project. I think it's very important for them to have a say in, what they're actually being delivered rather than just having a contractor decide, okay, I'm going to use a Schluter metal here because that's how I've always done it. Well, the designer, they might have something else in mind. The homeowner might have something else in mind. So, really having that three-way communication is important.
And that's built. And then it's like, hey, we need to redo it, right? So that happens too.
Absolutely. What's the earliest warning sign, the thing that tells you in a week, like in week one of a project, that tells you that the construction and design team are going to have a rough relationship?
It actually starts early on. There's really no check-in. There's like a handoff and that's it. And even sometimes that doesn't happen. And by handoff is you actually are giving the project and you're actually communicating a design intent to the person who's going to build it. Right. And a lot of times there's actually even a gap between the designer and the contractor. The client goes in and hires a designer, give me my drawings, and then they can hire the contractor.
Yeah, then they shop around to multiple contractors, yeah.
And then they never bring the two together.
Right.
For some reason, I think if they keep them separate, it's going to be good, but actually it's not. And we see it in other times is when the clients actually come back to us, and that happened before we had a design build part of our company, and it would be things like, what you design cannot be built. Right. That would be one of the... That's the first sign that the contractor never understood the plans. Right. Or another second big thing would be what you designed is so expensive to build. Right. It's too custom. It cannot be done. And it would be sad because we would create these beautiful designs. And then we would know that the client now is choosing to go with the design that contractor made for them. Because there was no alignment between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely seen that myself on site.
So there comes another question, design intent. From construction point of view, what does that mean to a contractor?
Yeah, so it's very important for a contractor to understand this concept because a lot is missed. If you don't understand what the intent of the design team was and you start building, you might totally miss the overall finish of a project. We talked about the Schluter metal versus, nice clean edge. The biggest thing that I seem to notice is on millwork. The finish on the millwork is very important. And so you can't have a contractor that's making those decisions in the field because of a familiarity with one product versus another. It's like if something that is very important to the designer, there needs to be a conversation before that changes. And so I think, having an understanding of what the design intent is, and then also being able to communicate with your designer as you have suggestions for deviating from that. And, I will say I appreciate the way that our team is flexible because there are multiple finishes that will give you the same effect, will achieve what you're trying to design, and will actually save the client money. That's something that I think is very important.
Everyone appreciates, right?
Yeah.
When there's like a thought put into that.
Absolutely. So from your side, when you're handing off a design to a contractor, what do you try to communicate beyond what's on the drawings?
Yeah. So when we do proper handoff or when we work with a team, sequence is going to be super important.
Okay.
What comes after. And also another thing that you kind of started talking about is going to be what is fixed and what is flexible.
Right.
So some things it's like fixed, like we need to have a 28 finish door opening, not just when that isn't built properly. Now we can't fit things through. I mean, and it kind of affects everything. So there's some things that are fixed. And then there's areas that are flexible. Like, there might be a better way, or even a more, when I say better, more economically less expensive way on maybe finishing a millwork.
Right.
And that maybe has some flexibility. Those are the two things that when we do a handoff, it's like these things like must be here. And like this thing can be flexible. So if there's that beautiful alignment, then there's success on both sides.
Yeah. No, and I do think that having that communication from the beginning, having strong communication from the beginning, I should say, probably helps develop those relationships to the point where when you do get into those finishes and you're trying to figure out the best course of action to proceed, you're working more as a team and less as a isolated set of two. So
another thing that I have a question on: what is the most common thing that you have noticed that contractors misread on the construction drawings?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I know it sounds silly, but dimensions are a big thing. And this is where I think understanding design intent, taking it back to there is very important. When you call out, like you said, a 28-inch door, I've seen contractors read that as the rough opening size.
Yes.
And to me, it seems silly because, of course, a 28-inch opening is going to, that you're telling me that's the door finish. Yeah, that's a minimum. Nobody's putting in 24s anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So
not in Europe.
To me, that's a red flag. So I'm going to ask you the question at that point. So I think making sure that you understand, the dimensions first, that's the most important thing.
Oh my gosh.
That's what we build to.
Sometimes we've seen that people don't know how to read dimension on site. Crazy.
Yeah. And then when it comes to finishes on materials, I've seen it with tile especially, where, you have you've picked out the right manufacturer, the right model number, but then you got the wrong finish. The designer has called out a matte finish on this tile, and then you pick up a high gloss finish. And I'll tell you what, the look at the end of the project, when you go from a matte finish to a high gloss, I mean, it's a completely different tile at that point. It can destroy the overall appearance of the project.
And not only appearance, but like the finish also affects the safety. So like if you
Fair.
put that high gloss on the floor in a shower, holy moly,
Right.
you're like, that's a disaster, versus like if you have a matte finish, then that has more of that tooth finish. And it's actually, there's specific finishes that we do want to incorporate. So again, little things, but like, learn how to read before you touch a project, right?
Yeah. And ask questions. Everyone's afraid to look stupid these days. And you know what? I've made huge mistakes on projects, but the beauty of it is there's nothing that you can do. You can never mess up so bad that you can't fix it.
Right. As long as you communicate.
As long as you're communicating.
And people sometimes don't, especially if they're not from the same team. That's kind of the thing. It's like, or they don't want to look bad, or it's like,
they're trying to throw the other person under the bus because
it happens too. It's like, it's like designer specs. Like, you come on.
Yeah.
Right?
And
so that's difficult.
And I'm less interested in who's to blame than I am in how do we fix this. And I think working as a team to solve problems is a huge advantage. So I will say I definitely appreciate that about our approach. So to that,
go ahead, please.
What's the biggest mistake designers make when handing off plans? The thing that creates the most field confusion?
Again, it's like those details that could be missing from the drawings.
Okay.
And we talked about the 28-inch door, and sure, like sometimes it's not including enough even images to like really paint a picture, and it's just your elevations, very technical, and then people on field aren't really connecting to like what is the finished product.
Right.
So not being afraid to have like spec sheet, but entire like a comprehensive presentation where that like really will cover everything.
Right.
And you can have those pictures, you can have those 3Ds, you can really understand on site without, just verifying before you start building.
We do have we're in-house design build all the way through start to finish, but we also, you do design for people, for other contractors, or for homeowners who already have their contractors selected. And so I would give them this one piece of advice. If you find yourself asking one another, if you're the contractor and your workers are there, your framers or whoever are on site, and you're asking them, well, what do you think this means on the plans? Yeah. Save yourself the time and call the designer. They can tell you exactly what it means.
But hopefully, right? Like if it's the right designer. But yes,
right.
Yes, if you can call and get people involved, and like a designer should be on site.
Absolutely.
At some point. So another question that I have, change orders.
Oh, that dirty word.
Yeah, change orders, right? Like everyone's terrified. So like every homeowners absolutely dreads them.
Yeah.
And from the construction side, is there things that can be done to avoid them?
Yeah. So I'm going to back up a little bit on the change order front. And before we actually answer this question, let's start with the fact that the reason why so many homeowners dread change orders is because a lot of contractors, they're trying to get the project, they're trying to win the bid. And so they go in with the lowest number they possibly can, right?
100%.
And what happens is, because they do that, as the client starts making decisions, they don't always understand their client's vision, or they ignore it. And so they go with a low number. Well, then their client has expensive tastes, or, they have a specific want in a certain area that is going to blow that budget out of the water. And so that cost gets passed on to the client in the way of change order. The way that we operate, we go through the full design process before we give our final number to the client. We can usually get close. We'll give them a ROM and have, a pretty good idea of where their project is going to fall money-wise. But by the time they sign that contract, they should have a fixed bid that shouldn't change, because we know the finished materials and we're not going to live off those change orders. So we try to avoid those as much as possible. I've always worked under that umbrella, but I will say they do happen. So change orders, in my opinion, should only happen in two situations on a job site. One, when the client changes their mind on something, or they decide to add something, right? That's one. Number two is when there's something that was like you were unable to predict, that when you opened up that wall, you were going to find wire that was spliced together with electrical tape and not actually done correctly. Which has happened. I think I talked about this in the last podcast. I had a project where literally opened up the wall and the wiring was just pieced together, electrical taped, huge fire hazard. And so we ended up having to rewire the whole house. It was very expensive, but at the end of the day, the client had a safe home to live in. So those two scenarios are when it's acceptable. Very rarely should a client see a change order outside of those two variables.
I fully agree with you. I mean, there's ways to prevent them if things are thought through.
Yeah. And you anticipate as much as you can.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
In a bathroom, when we demo, I assume I'm going to have to replace the subfloor. I'm going to assume that the stop valves are going to need replaced.
Yeah, because it's 90% of the time.
Yeah.
And if your contractor did not account for that to get the lowest bid, that's why having a competitive bids, it's at the end of the day, people are not going to work for free.
Right.
Things need to get accounted for. And having a full comprehensive bid is so much more better than having those unexpected things that will arise later that then you have to account for.
Yeah. And I honestly don't think the contractors are gouging people with their change orders to try and fatten their pockets. But what's happening is they're going in with that low bid trying to get the work. And then it's like they literally cannot do the additional work without billing for it.
Yeah.
And so
someone needs to pay for it. So either upfront or after, but and that's why a lot of jobs, there are some degree of that unknown, especially if the contractor hasn't been really in line with the design process early on. So there's and then sometimes, to add to the change orders, and then we get off the topic, is things do come up that you don't know. You want to, looks fine from structural, and then you open a wall and there's a brick wall behind it.
Right.
Now you have to demo or there's wiring that's running, and there's really not a way of knowing, especially with remodel. New construction, you can prevent that 100%. There shouldn't be change orders in new construction, really. But a remodel, you really don't know until you open the can.
Yeah. Well, so from a design perspective, on change orders specifically, when those enter the conversation on a construction site, what does that tell you about what might have happened earlier in the process to cause that?
With the contractor?
Yeah.
Again, it kind of goes back to the contractor not understanding what is going to be the full scope of the job. They don't really understand the design intent. And a lot of times there's been times where I show up on the job and contractor, especially before we had our group, the contractor is opening these drawings for the first time. They're looking at them they never seen it before, and they're asking questions that are right there.
Yep.
And so it's you create these beautiful plans, you have everything thought through, you have everything lined up, and then these questions come up. And so no surprise that there's change orders, because they kind of scan through it. Okay, we're doing a kitchen. Okay, great. But what it takes to do that kitchen, what kind of cabinets are going to go? Do we need to remove a soffit? What, all those things. And wrong things get ordered.
Right. Absolutely.
And then it's there's no way but to have a change order now.
Yeah. So one of the things you touched on was change orders and how expensive they can be. So I was thinking back to the most expensive change order that I've seen that was avoidable was actually on a project that I didn't get to work on. I had bid the project. I came in a little bit high. I think I was about 7 or 8% above the lowest contractor, and they ended up getting the work. But I was still in communication with the client. They were a mutual friend, and so still was in communication. They would call me every once in a while to ask me questions. And one of the things that came up during construction was the electrical system for the house, because of all the upgrades they were making and the addition that they were putting on. The electrical system needed to be upgraded. And this house was very far. I don't remember the exact distance, but I mean, it was hundreds of yards away from the power pole.
Wow.
And so they literally had to replace all of the wiring, and it had to go in the ground,
Wow.
from the pole into. So, and that's the other thing. It was above ground. Like, it was actually strung across, but because they were upgrading it, they now had to put it in the ground.
New codes, new regulations.
So the transformer, run the wire that full distance to get to that 300 amp service.
Yeah.
And it was almost $250,000 additional cost.
Work.
And so this is the thing, is what happened was, they looked at my number and I was, 7-8% high. I think 5% of that happened to be that electrical system upgrade, which wouldn't have been $250,000 if they would have caught it before they actually started.
Yeah. So there's ways to prevent that 100%. So that's a really good example. And we see it happen often.
So what's the thing you can do inside a design build team that you simply cannot do when design and construction are separate contracts?
Yeah, that's a good segment into the next step too, is like working within the design team firm. I think that it starts from being in contact and having everyone in-house. I think it's beautiful because then the team is knowing and anticipating. And when I say team, this is design, build, even you can say furnish, right? All the way through of what is going to be the intent and planning for those changes and thinking through we talked earlier, what is the fixed and what is flexible, because there's always going to be budgets and we can move things around to still create a beautiful finished product. And I think that's what makes me the most happiest, is to see the design all the way through completion. When you're putting the last candle.
Oh, there's so much satisfaction in that.
It is like having that completed job, and that's like, I know not every person will actually, not every design team would actually go for that. Like it's not important. There's a lot of contractors that aren't doing that, but for us it is a big satisfaction. Now walk me through what coordination looks like between design builds versus just the traditional way of hiring. Here's a designer, here's my contractor, here's my architect, here's my engineer. Like walk me through that.
As the contractor, the biggest advantage we have in working with directly with our own design team is I am actually in communication with you, with the rest of the design team, well before construction documents have even been thought of, like from schematic design. And so there's this feedback loop that we have that you just don't get when you're working with independent design firms and contractors. So, and the way that benefits the client is, it might make more sense if you want a cantilever section somewhere, like I might be able to build that a different way and still give you the same exact finished product, but I can guide the design process to make that a third of the cost or half of the cost of how you might design it. And I've seen this happen before where, because a designer designed something one way, now the contractor feels, locked in on this because they didn't work with the design team. The construction documents are done, permits are already been submitted. So it's like they have to build it that way, and they have to build a client that extra, basically 100% more to achieve that same look. Well, because I'm in this conversation with you, we can talk about this before it even gets submitted for permitting.
That's so right.
And then you can make the adjustment, and it's like that cost savings is passed directly onto the client, and it saves us a lot of headache later on. Not having to go back and try and change, file for a new permit or a variation from the permit.
And it could happen. Like all of those and above could totally happen.
Absolutely. Has being in a design build model changed the way that you design, and does working closely with construction affect your design decisions?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. All of these questions are good.
Yeah, they're all great. Yeah,
but this is really good.
Those are really good.
In that sense that when we earlier in our company's career, I want to say, or in career, or just in our company, how it was when we had individual contractors that were we would just hand off the drawings. There would be things that we didn't have control of over, like what doors are they going to spec? And I know, like, what doors, what flooring, for example, like the brand itself, or even in when it's like building envelope, your siding, your windows, like you don't really have a control. So our drawings would be, and they would even ask for it to be a little bit more vague in that sense that there was no specific brand or specific style. And then they would decide on site during bids or whatever, like they kind of run the show. Now that we are like working within the design build concepts, how are we going to even install it? So this is what I asked our architect, our design build designer, like how will it, like how are we going to build it? And so that would also again save budgets because we're thinking through that, but also gives us control over the finished detail. Now we're specing a specific door. We are specific the casing for the door. So there's like a lot of those small little elements that a lot of times won't even change that much of the design, but we have like I want to say control. Like it's more of a control from a good place, not like it's like
Right.
for the success of the finished product. So, and that's just one example. It goes into kitchen as well. Like we can specify what kitchen and who we're gonna work with,
Yeah.
and we know the details of that of those cabinets. So like it just the quality is better, and it's that seamless transition between design to build, and then that connection between the two hand in hand all the way through is what was really exciting. What should a homeowner ask their designer when they're trying to hire a designer or a contractor? What questions do you think they should ask?
Yeah. So one of the most
If they're not sorry, like if they're not working with a design build, like,
right.
clarify they want to hire a designer, like what questions they should ask.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the most important things we discussed when you have a disjointed design firm working with a contractor is they have to have good communication. I think one of the easiest ways for me to recognize whether or not a designer is going to actually have control over the finished product that's being delivered, that's the most important thing, right? Is making sure you get what you paid to have designed,
and you can actually build it.
Yeah. And so I will ask the designer, how often are you going to be on site during construction? Is it once a week? Is it twice a week? If they say it's less than once a week, that's a red flag for me, because if they're not out there at least once a week to check on things, to make sure, they're there to answer any questions that the contractor might have, that's when things really fall apart. And so I think most projects, you need a designer to be out there at least once a week. If they're going to be out there twice a week, great. I mean, that's even better. But once a week is usually sufficient.
Someone needs to be there checking in. A project manager, but yes.
But that's a simple question.
Yeah, that is 100% sure.
Yeah.
100%.
For a homeowner who's already mid-project and sensing that design and construction aren't aligned, what should they do right now?
Yeah, like right away, like call a meeting.
Yep.
Get your designer and your contractor in the same, or like if it's a architect, you can get your architect too, or whoever else you have on that you've been working separate. Get them all in one room, and have those conversations when two are present.
Right.
A lot of times, what homeowner does, they go to a lot of times to the contractor, not as much designer.
Right, because the contractor's on site. They see them all the time.
What they're afraid is like conflict.
Yep.
And they're afraid to like maybe piss their contractor off or them walking off the job. And so they're just like, they're tippy-toeing around the contractor a lot of times because they already invested so much money. Because design sure costs, there's an investment up front, but it's like by no mean of how much you are going to be paying to get the work done.
Yeah.
It's only a percentage of the whole project that you invest in the design. And so what happens is the designer, although there's like miscommunication, the homeowner is just afraid of saying, hey, Mr. Contractor, just hold on, let me get my designer and see what's going on. And I know like when clients did call me at that time, I would show up and I'll be okay. So we have a problem with the tile, really? Well, let me show you how to install it.
Right. But what they're doing there is they're talking to the contractor over here, and then they're talking to you over here, and it's like they're playing this middleman game that they don't need to, because if they just get both of you in the room at the same time, you can figure out a solution quickly.
Yeah, and that's I think where a lot of stress for homeowners come. They think, this is going to be so easy. The design process was so simple. It's done. A lot of times it is much simpler than when you build, right? And when they get into builds, like they again, it's like they just are afraid, and a lot of times a good designer will show up, even if she's wearing heels or he is wearing a nice outfit, and they can show how things need to be put together, unless they're decorators. But designers that have that, like I've done it so many times. I'm like, let me show you. Like, don't tell me it cannot be done. And there is a bit of that ruffling feathers. But like, what else are you supposed to do, right?
Well, yeah, and I think that's driven by the fact that the client sees the designer and the contractor as two separate groups. They're two separate entities,
like,
right?
Instead of just one, like, it's like I have this now. I have to deal with this. Then I'm gonna do B. And I'm gonna deal with a store to buy my furniture and hope it fits. So like, that's. I don't think people understand what it takes to have a successful job, and I don't think they understand what they're getting themselves into. When they're trying to like manage the projects.
Right. Yeah. When they're self-managing the project.
Like, it's going to be like, maybe cheaper, maybe faster. Like, and all of those are usually they end up with unfinished projects.
Yep. Absolutely. And that's if they've kept their sanity while doing it.
Oh, yeah, I know, right? They don't lose your mind and don't get a divorce.
Don't worry. We've already lost our minds. So let us take care of it for you.
Yes. I know. We've been through that, right? So like, okay, we're ready. We know what we're doing. So I have last question for you, Brandon.
Oh, I get the last question. All right.
You do,
Awesome.
You're important, right? You're representing the construction portion. So what is one thing that a homeowner can do to set up their project for success?
That's a great question. I mean, first and foremost, if you can find a design build firm that you trust and that you like, start there.
Yeah.
Work with a design build firm, because all of these things we've talked about, the lack of communication, the mistakes that are made, the decisions that are made by the contractor without the input of the designer or the homeowner, you can avoid that if you hire a good design build firm. You cut out that that gap in communication. You're working with a team that has a great feedback loop that is actually working from start to finish on your project all together as a team. It's not a pocket over here working on the beginning part and then a handoff, and then the contractor has to finish it on the back end. It's a very cohesive, well-rounded approach to a project when you have a design build firm. You're going to save yourself a lot of headache. You're going to save yourself some money. And if they're like us, we're a fixed bid firm. If you're working with a fixed bid firm, don't just look at the number at the bottom of the page. Look at what you're getting for that number.
Yes.
Ask them about finishes and actually, what the selections are that they've accounted for. A lot of times in the beginning, before they actually have the finishes selected, they're going to have placeholders for materials or a rough estimate on, your tile costs, your floor, hardwood flooring costs and everything. Ask them what that number is and then what the square footages are that they actually have associated with that. So you can decide if you're actually comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thanks everyone for joining this episode, and hopefully this was helpful. Now, if you know of someone that is mid-project and they're losing their minds, do send them this episode. I think they'll be able to draw some things from it and maybe make those pivots. They can still have a successful design or, a successful build too. So again, thanks so much for watching, and until next episode.